in the rafters. Can you guys all hear me okay? Last row? Okay, cool. Hi, my name is Nitya Narasimhan. And first of all, thank you for sticking around till the end of the day and actually coming here and putting me ahead of ice cream. You have no idea how much I appreciate that. I don't even get enough of that at home. My name is Nitya Narasimhan, and today I really want to talk to you about building real-time reactive apps. So a little bit about me. I kind of have a mixed background. I started off actually in research. I have a, yes? Is it better if I step away? Oh, there's an echo, they tell me. He'll fix it. You can understand. You know, usually when I speak, I'm so loud I don't need a microphone, so I can't even hear this. Is this better? Yeah? All right, tell me if you have any more issues. All right, so a little bit about me. I started off my life as a researcher. I actually worked, I got a PhD in computer engineering, and then I worked at Motorola for over a decade. And a lot of the work I did was basically in building applications and services for our next generation smartphone and interactive television platforms. So a lot in the ubiquitous computing space. But more recently, I kind of work more with kind of early stage startups and switched over to products. So it's more consumer focused. And that's kind of where I really, between that and this, I've got this huge amount of passion for mobile and web application development. I also do a lot of advocacy. I run Google Developer Group New York and Hudson Valley, for those of you who know Hudson Valley. And we've kind of been doing a lot of work in basically teaching people how to code Android and also machine learning. But just a sense for who you guys are. How many of you here are mobile web developers? Oh my God, okay. Entrepreneurs? Designers? Okay, who knows React? Yay, okay. Who knows Firebase? Oh, awesome. I was like, that was my biggest fear, is that everyone knows Firebase by the time I get here. And how many of you are familiar with material design? Awesome, okay. So we have a pretty good mix. So about this talk, my goal in this is really, really simple. I'm going to assume that none of you have ever kind of coded a web app before, right? And so if you're walking in the door and you want to understand what it means to do a web app, what are the things you need to think about? So I want to start off by first setting table stakes, right? What's the minimum thing you have to do to be even competitive in the current marketplace? And then we're going to talk about, really at a very high level, about two technologies, Firebase and React. And then hopefully I'll spend most of the time kind of walking through what it takes to scaffold out a full stack app using Firebase and React. And really what I want to hopefully leave you with is it's incredibly easy to do, thanks to some tools that just came out. So let's for a minute assume that you guys want to build a web app, right? Maybe you're an entrepreneur and you need to have an MVP to put in front of your VCs for funding, or you're part of a team and you have to ship a product really fast and you need to get going, right? So what are your table stakes? So the table stakes today are way, way, way different from what they used to be many years ago. What does that mean? It means that today, your users' expectation of you is way different. They expect their apps to be bond responsive, meaning that the minute you write your app, it better work on their phone, their smartphones, their desktops, their tablets, everything, right? They also expect it to be offline supported. The next billion users are going to come on in countries that have intermittent connectivity. So if you want to really market your app to them, it needs to be able to work even when the network is very flaky. Third, you need fast interactions. This is actually from the Rail model, for those of you who are not familiar with it. But what it really talks about is that increasingly performance is not just about how long it took to load your page. It really is about how smooth every aspect of your app is, right? When you scroll, the animations, the time it takes to load, how efficient your app behaves when it's idle, right? All these things matter. And then there is the actual user experience. How many of you have used an Uber app? Right? Uber is the bane of my existence, because what it has done is it has set the standard for what everyone expects their app should be, right? What does that mean? Real-time, reactive. Real-time means that your app is getting data in real time as it's updated on the server. Reactive means that when that data arrives on your phone, it refreshes your view without you touching anything. So if you think about the user experience in an Uber call, right? You request a car. The minute you've got the driver signed up, the car is moving. You're not pressing a refresh button. It's just happening in real time, showing you where the data is. So that real-time reactive behavior is super important. So that's what modern users expect, which means as a developer, this is what you can expect. Constant frustration, right? Why is that? It's like the biggest headache in the world. So let's unpack it and see why. It's because when you, and you might have seen this graph in a lot of Firebase talks, but it really, really makes this statement, right? Because when you do a full stack, people will tell you this left side, that's what the stack looks like. You know, nice little clean layers, little boxes. You're like, oh my God, this is so simple. A child of 5 could do it. And then you start, and that's where you end up, right? It's not simple and it's not separate. It's actually complex pieces all interconnected, like driving each other crazy. And if you think the bad news stops there, it doesn't. You just decide, OK, great, I'm going to dive in anyhow, and then you find you've got to make all these decisions, right? So if you think of the stack itself, great. They said, you need a database. What database should I use? You might have to have different choices based on what your priorities are. What backend should I use for building my server-side code? How about user analytics? What is the authentication provider? Where should I host my app? And all of these questions. And remember, the user's table stakes means that you also have to still address all those things on the front end. And this really isn't easy. I don't know how many of you think this is a nice thing to have. And do you think the bad news is over? No. Because even after you're like, all right, great, I have all these decisions and I will make them, it turns out that this is what happens. This side is apparently a kind of a notice that hangs in Mozilla. The number of days since the last JavaScript framework, 0. Every single day, there's a new shiny toy. There's a new library, a new framework, a new tool, someone telling you, I'm the best, here is a new thing for you to learn. And you're sitting there wondering, this system is changing so rapidly, should I use that, or should I go with what I have? And the other side of it is that once you've even made the decision, you're constantly second-guessing yourself. Did I do it right? Did I pick right? Should I have done it differently? And analysis paralysis will kill you, right? So should I stay or should I go? And at this point, you're probably thinking that's the end of the bad news. It turns out that, in reality, that blue part is all the work that you're going to have to do anyway, that things the users need, but they don't care about it. They're not going to rate your app based on the fact you have to do all that work. They're going to rate you on this tiny little front-end experience. So in essence, 80% of the work that you're doing, you're going to do, it's thankless, right? And so to you as a developer, this is really the question. It's like, how do you balance your costs with user expectations, right? Your cost, putting every one of those things is your time, your complexity, your team, but you're going to be rated on that, right? So how do you balance that? And this is where, if you kind of, how many of you have heard or done Firebase Code Labs? Anyone? OK, how many of you heard some of the Firebase talks? OK, so hopefully this will still gel with what you've heard. What you can do with Firebase is you effectively outsource that entire backend, right? You're like, great, I'm not going to learn 60 different new technologies. I'm going to outsource it, and they'll take care of it. And because this now lets you focus on your front end, it's actually a good deal for you. The other side of it is that now that you've decided the front end, Firebase does go one step closer and actually provides you integrations with a lot of the popular front end frameworks. Just out of curiosity, anyone here Angular? Oh, OK, I'm sorry. Don't say anything mean when I talk about React. How many of you here are Polymer fans? So I am, too. I initially wanted to kind of talk about it, but the Polymer Summit is around the corner, and I have no idea what they're going to do, so I didn't want to say something and find everything went out the window the minute they kind of talked about it. Polymer 2 is coming, though. React, Android and iOS. Anyone here Android? Awesome. iOS? OK. So the idea here is that, if you're familiar with any one of these front-end frameworks, you basically can jump in and outsource the back end, and Firebase will take care of it. So today, I actually want to focus on this particular combination, which is Firebase on the back end and React on the front end. And I kind of want to set the stage for why I think this is a nice combination for my current needs. And for those of you who are not familiar with React, let's start there. React is actually a library that comes from Facebook. And what it's really, really good at is it's good at building the user interface. It's a JavaScript library, and it's good at building user interfaces. But it really does this in a really interesting way. It allows you to build them as small components that you can compose together to build large UIs really fast. It does a lot of other things. But the thing that I want to really, if you take one message away about React, right, it's that what React does is it manages the application state with respect to the view. What that means is that as long as, you can think of almost your view being a state machine, as long as you change your state in the React app, it automatically detects the state changes and refreshes the view. You don't have to do any additional work to make sure that your app is reactive. It reacts automatically when the state changes, which is awesome. So you can almost think about React as, I'll bring the reactive front end, you just add a server. And Firebase, on the other hand, flips it around and says, I'll bring the back end, you just bring the client, right? So they work well together. Now, how do these two fit? React manages the state of the app within the app, right? Firebase manages and synchronizes application data across instances of the application. So you can think about it in terms of, if I have real-time data, right? Some client changes the data, goes to the server, which is Firebase. It propagates the change out to everyone, so the real-time impact of the database is felt everywhere. React now says, oh, the data changed, I better render the view, and it updates to show reactive views. So effectively, you've got your real-time reactive UX. Make sense? Yes? Awesome. So we're going to kind of try to unpack this a little, but I wanted to have a really simple goal initially, so we achieve something before my time runs out. So my goal for today is really to walk you to the point where you've scaffolded out this very simple app. And the simple app really uses a combination of two toolkits, the Firebase toolkit on the left, and something called the Create React app. Have any of you heard of this? Yay, all right. So this has been incredibly one of the best things ever. It came out of the Facebook incubator, and it solved headaches for a lot of people in building single-page apps just to get a simple scaffold out. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But this is going to be my goal, to kind of teach you about this, teach you about that, and show you how easy it is to put it together to get to this stage. And then I'm going to give you homework, because I think I'm going to run out of time. And my homework to you is, this is a code lab that you all have seen, hopefully. The link to it is also going to be in the slides. And it's really a code lab that basically builds you a full-fledged, real-time Firebase chat app. But it's not done in React. So your goal is, once all the scaffolding is done, just take that code and walk through the steps, but now do it in this scaffold, and you will get this app. And I'm actually going to try to post a link to a completed GitHub project with this, but I'll post it after the fact so you don't cheat. I still want you to go do this at home. Yes? Am I hearing yeses? Thank you. All right, so let's start off first by unpacking the server side. We're going to talk about Firebase, right? So how many of you can kind of tell me what Firebase is? When I say Firebase, what do you think? Server side? Anything else? Database. Authentication. So this is, when we think about it, right, our instinct is like Firebase is a database. It's just there in the name, and it's real time, and it's a backend. So I kind of want to spend a minute talking about the evolution. Hopefully, you might have seen this slide before. But I wanted to really kind of talk to you about how this notion of Firebase has changed, that hopefully you will also remember. It started off actually as a really small startup called Firebase. And all they did was a real-time database. So the idea is that you sync to their database, it automatically syncs across applications, you're done. Then Google acquired them, and it evolved to what they call backend as a service. And their idea was, bring the front end, everything else we take care of for you, but they focused on develop. And the reason I'm kind of touting this is that I'm actually going to be doing a talk on Firebase Analytics at DroidCon, if any of you are in New York next week. And one of the most interesting things about this platform right now is that with V3, which just came out at I/O this year, they kind of have expanded away from just thinking of you as a developer who builds the app to thinking of you as someone who is a product owner who is now responsible for taking that app and making it successful outside. How many of you believe the field of dreams is real, that if you build it, they will come? Never happens in real life, right? So if you get a chance, definitely go look at some of the other pieces. We won't talk about them today. But one of the core things about this new platform, which I personally have found fascinating since I started looking at it, is analytics, really understanding what your users are doing. But the bigger picture is it's proven technology from Google. So you're not really kind of going to be working with technology that's going to go away tomorrow, so that FOMO will go away. And it does actually provide a lot of things for you. Getting started with Firebase is really, really easy. So for those of you who haven't done a code lab, it's really as simple as this. You go to the Firebase console, firebase.google.com, console.firebase.google.com, and you create an account using your Gmail ID. You're set up. They have a Create Project button. Fill in the name of your project, click Create, and you get yourself a dashboard. And the one thing I want to point out over here, which makes this relevant, is that when you create this, you may come in as an iOS developer, you may come in as an Android developer, you may come in as a React or an Angular. You create one project. And later on, should you choose to add other clients, you can attach them to the same thing. So you can leverage the data you've accumulated, you can plug in analytics and understand behaviors across apps, et cetera. So you'll see that once you create this, it automatically gives you that little dashboard over there and shows you how you can connect up to different clients. And we're going to walk through that when we do the scaffold. So it's as simple as this to get started with Firebase. So let's talk a little bit about what it provides for development. So remember, my goal was just to get you scaffolded with that simple Firebase plus React app. So in that bigger picture, we're going to focus only on the tiny bit to the left. So the first thing it provides, which I'm going to go through this from the perspective of I am, a poor startup. I came in, I want to see how I can build my first app so I can take it to a VC and show him what a great job I did. And I want to get away as far as possible with free stuff, right? How many of you have been there? Everyone should raise their hands right now. You just should. Hosting is one of the biggest challenges. So when you build an app and you want to show it off, whether you're a student, you want to put it on a portfolio, whether you're a person going to VC, how do you show it working on a real back end on real mobile phones? So Firebase hosting is really useful for two reasons. You don't have to use any of the front ends. You can build your entire app with some other scaffold, just bring that entire thing over here to Firebase and just dump it and use Firebase only as a hosting solution. What do you get for it? You get a lot of features, but a couple of them which I find interesting is you take advantage of the fact that you're hosted on a backend that's going to scale and take care of the scalability issues for you, so you don't worry. You can also connect custom domains. So if you decide to call your company by a certain name, you can point it. No one's the wiser. Second, we're going to talk a little bit more about real-time databases, so we won't go there right now. Third is security, right? When you have data, you want to make sure that you kind of protect it, especially given all the issues that are happening in the world today. So Firebase, by default, all data, it's HTTPS connections. And within the database itself, you have the ability to specify rules for access, authentication, and authorization, as well as ways for you to validate the data when you enter it. So in a sense, you do have kind of all the basic components that you would need for a database available to you. Authentication. So this is a big one, right? How many of you have actually shipped a web app and wrote your own code to do authentication? Yay, OK. So I've done that, and it's a nightmare. And also, I just don't want to hold that data in my databases. So this was really very cool. They support a lot of the custom third-party providers, the Googles, the Twitters, Facebooks, all of those out of the box. The other thing also is you can go to the dashboard, and you can do things like, just out of the top of your heads, what are the two things that when you build, when you have an authentication system, what are the two main kind of additional things that people expect? Forgot password and? Yes, all the time. You have to write code for that. And verify users, right? You want to verify your email before you let them in. So a lot of these things can be automated through the dashboard, which is really cool. It takes away a lot of your headaches for you. And finally, storage. Now, I'm not going to go into the other parts, but storage is when you want to store files. So let's say you are building the next greatest photo album where, it's Snapchat++, right? You actually need a place where you can store physical assets, that is the files and your media. You can use Firebase for that. It's actually backed by Google Storage, so you can kind of see it as a global CDN. So all of these you get for free by using the backend. And connecting to all of these is actually fairly seamless. So if we get a chance, we'll actually flip and look at the documents. But otherwise, just keep in mind that once we've got to the point where we've integrated React and Firebase together, you now have that Firebase object in your system. You can access all these APIs and play with them. So let's talk a little bit about Firebase as a database, right? So the whole purpose of this talk was to kind of focus on real-time and reactive. First thing you have to know is that it's a NoSQL database. It stores everything as JSON blobs, which is kind of a good thing if you're used to it. I'm just going to segue for a minute, because somebody reminded me that my description actually said I was going to talk about Meteor, and I'm not. That's a holdover from my previous life. How many of you here are Meteor fans? Do you know Meteor? Oh, OK. How many of you know Mongo? OK. So basically, increasingly, you're finding that when you determine, or when you especially work in the consumer space, you often need flexible schema. You need the ability to store more data, be able to slice and dice it. NoSQL is getting popular. In Firebase, you're going to get all your data stored as JSON objects. It has a tree-based hierarchy. It's rooted at a top root ref. And so you can walk down the tree to go and look at all the different pieces of data. You can almost think of every collection that you have as being a child node at the top, and then you can walk down to individual items simply by walking down the path of the tree. The nice thing about that is it actually translates very kind of intuitively to URLs, so you can then use those directly as a REST API to access pieces of data in the database as well. Data sync, you get that for free. So when you use Firebase, one of the things is when your clients connect to Firebase and use a particular reference, any updates to that will fire events that you can then consume and callbacks so that you can automatically have your front end respond to things like children nodes being added, data being changed, being deleted, etc. And finally, they do have offline support. What this means is that should for any reason your network not be accessible, it will actually keep the data in a local persistent store so that as your app continues to fire real-time events and continues to store and read data from that local cache until you reconnect. And when you reconnect, it'll then kind of resolve conflicts and sync it back up to the source. Make sense? Cool. Data retrieval. So I talked a little bit about this. Writing to the database is really simple. Reading back, you can see that they're actually at a very high level. You know, you kind of get events that tell you when major changes happen to the data in your database. And it depends on what reference you're grabbing. So if you grab the top level, top level node, you can kind of see what event changes are happening in that collection. You can zoom down and look at a particular item and register only for changes at that item level, etc. If we have time, we'll go back into towards the end and kind of try some of these out. But if not, I really, at this point, will kind of point you to the doc so you can go and look at all the various nuances of these APIs. So now I'm going to take a short kind of detour and talk about React on the front end. Yeah? By the way, is my pace okay? I've been accused of being really slow. So React. So React is actually one of my favorite discoveries, or rather one of the things that I kind of came to very recently, but the more I play with it, the more I really like it. So what is React? The first thing I'll say is it's, again, a proven technology from Facebook. So I was having a conversation recently, and I talked to you about Meteor. If you're looking for real-time, reactive, full-stack solutions, that's another solution that you can look at. And the reason I bring that up is they actually have React baked in there as well. But whenever you remember I talked to you about the new next shiny toy? Whenever you go and look at a new technology, one of the things you really want to understand is this going to be around in 3 years' time, right? So the thing for me that makes me confident about this is A, they use it in their own products, which means it does scale, and B, just go look at the trends on React. They're like, Angular is the other one that has skyrocketed, but React is the same thing. There's a huge community outpouring of love and support around this community. So it's a great thing for you to invest in. What makes React different? At a very high level, if you've ever programmed front end, there are two things you want to keep in mind about React. If someone comes to you and says, tell me about React, what exactly does it do? Two things. It allows you to build user interfaces using declarative means. What that means is that you would actually declare the components of you write your view out, and React then makes sure that in that view, so you basically compose your application views out of small components. Each component, you just describe what it should look like. And React maintains a state for that component. After that, you just change the state for every view. Like you think of it as a state machine, that your application interactions are a state machine which kind of move from view to view. You just change the data, React will automatically refresh the view to reflect the new state. So you don't have to take care of all the overheads of figuring out which things to grab and what things to update. It's really seamless. And we'll look at a little snippet of code in a minute. This is just my personal view. The other reason I like React is when you start writing React code, let me ask a quick question. How many of you work in multi-person teams, not by yourself, like you work with a team of people? Yeah? How many of you work with people who are not in the same place as you? Right? The biggest nightmare, if you've ever done this, is how to really segment your code so that each of you is building stuff and then you want to integrate it together, right? React has been one of the few front-end libraries that I've really liked for its ability for me to be able to clearly see all the code for every UI thing in one place. Because one of the biggest nightmares if you worked in web development is how do you keep your code, right? Where do you keep your HTML? Where do you keep your JavaScript, et cetera? So that's one of the nice things. The second thing is it's component-based. What does that mean? It means that you really, in React, what you do with your code is you build small widgets. You kind of create small components, which each represents some segment of your view. And then your application is literally composed by putting these together. And because each component maintains its own state, it encapsulates and is driven by its state changes, your whole application as a whole will respond to state changes very seamlessly, right? So it allows you to scale your UI in a very, very intuitive way. In addition to this, there's actually lots of other packages around the React ecosystem. There's Flux, Redux, Relay that you will kind of build on. But for now, we're just going to keep it simple and talk about it. Most importantly, React brings the full power of JavaScript to your UI, which you might not have thought possible. The second part that I kind of want you to keep in the back of your mind, because you're always going to be asked, why not Polymer, why not Angular, why not this, why not that? One thing that I have found very useful with React is that when you build React components, you can also kind of consider the fact that you could use React Native to then create pure native apps that support your services as well. So this particular article, Bonnie Eisenman actually wrote a book on building apps with React Native, which I hugely recommend. We're not going to talk about that here, but for every one of you who's built a web app that has been kind of asked, when are you going to build the first native one? This kind of gives you a path to that. So I'm going to take a couple of minutes to walk through what a React component looks like. So immediately, do any of you see something weird about this code? For those of you who are JavaScript buffs, do you see something weird? Does it like make your skin crawl? Then I don't have purists in the audience. Have you ever seen, does this look like JavaScript or HTML to you? JavaScript, right? Have you ever seen a div tag in JavaScript? Doesn't that make your skin crawl? You're like, what is it doing out here? Why is the fox among the chickens? No, I'm kidding. That actually was one of the things that threw people off. So there are lots of things. I was segueing there, but here are the 4 parts of React that you kind of want to understand. First, it's component-based. You can see that when you create a React component, so here you're creating a component called hello, you're actually doing react.createClass. You've created a class for that view, then you can instantiate it, right? The way you instantiate it is you call react.dom.render, right? And you call react.dom.render, and you pass it that tag. You've effectively created an element of that name that you can then render. So if you look at this code, the render basically tells you the name of that component. Name equals world is an attribute that you're passing in, just like you would pass into any other HTML element. That's now a property that we'll talk about in a second. You pass that in, and then you tell React DOM, I want you to render this guy into the DOM at an element with that ID. Now, there's going to be a lot of weird things that you see here, but hopefully I can get you a gut sense of what's happening. The first thing is that you'll realize that that HTML code is sitting in a JavaScript file. How did that happen? That's because we're talking about point 3 here. React kind of supports an optional, can think of it as a markup called JSX. And what JSX allows you to do, it allows you to write HTML-like code that you can put inside JavaScript. And at runtime, it gets transpiled into HTML, right? It gets compiled so that your code is not really running as JavaScript. It gets done for you. But one of the things that has been really cool about this for me is that it allows me in the same component file to have both the view and the behavior in one file. So when I'm writing my app, I just have one file for each view element, and it contains both the structure as well as the behavior code, right? The model and the logic. The second thing is that the auto render. What happens in a React app is when you write this code, you see this method called render. Render is a default method that's in every React app that has state. And when the state of that app changes, whatever is inside the render method is automatically called to re-render. And in this case, all render does is it actually creates the element that can be injected into the DOM, right? And it updates it with whatever the data is. So in this case, by passing in the property name as world, you'll see that over there, very similar to templates, you're binding that name. So effectively, you've created an element which says, hello, that person's name. Render automatically injects it. I mean, it returns it as the outcome of this particular view. That gets injected into the DOM, and now you see that element on the screen. The fourth component here, or the fourth part of React, and this is the one that kind of is a little mind-bending. How many of you have heard of this term virtual DOM? Yeah, virtual. Who thinks virtual DOM is cool? Yes, me too. So this blew my mind the first time I heard it. So what happens in React? How does React work that makes it different from other front ends? So I hope all of you are familiar with the notion of a DOM, right? The DOM is your document object model in the browser for your app. what React does is actually maintains a virtual copy of that DOM. And this is how it maintains it reactive. So what happens if you've ever built web apps is that when you have to like modify the view in kind of response to something that the user did, the operations can be very expensive because you're going to be changing and redrawing a lot of components. In almost any framework you use, that's the case. And so there's a lot of like tips and tricks you're told that can minimize the overhead and make sure that the renders are responsive and fast. What React does, which initially was really mind-blowing, is it keeps a virtual DOM. And when you make all these changes, you actually just change the state. The state causes the updates to get put onto the virtual DOM. React compares the virtual DOM with the real DOM. It diffs them. And it looks at the minimal change that has to be made and just injects that into the real DOM. So when you write your code, you're not really working with the actual DOM. You're working with this virtual thing. And your first idea is like, how on earth can this be efficient, right? How on earth is it like doing a diff of this giant app in real? It does, it works, it's fast. But that's actually one of the key properties. So if there are two unique things about React versus almost every other front end, it's the fact that you can use JSX and the fact that it has this virtual DOM that really makes it very, very fast in terms of doing reactive rendering. Make sense? So getting started with React, so this is the one thing I want to point you to. Facebook really kind of recently released this in their incubator. There's a link somewhere at the end, perhaps. But it's a little tool called Create React App. If you've never played with React, I suggest you go grab it. What you can do is, just with NPM, if you install this and walk through these simple steps, within seconds, you'll have a boilerplate app set up and ready to go. And the app that I showed you before, you basically get that, right? And the reason that I tell you to go this route is if you go to React, if you've ever been to React before, there's a lot of little parts that need to be made to work together to get your React app to work. So first thing is React is JavaScript-based, right? So a lot of the stuff that you do, you're going to use NPM, the Node package manager, to get those dependencies. So if you are doing it without this particular scaffolder, you have to manage that yourself. Then you have a tool called Babel, whose purpose is basically to take the code that you're seeing, which, the JSX, ES6 code, and transpile it into JavaScript for all the older browsers that don't yet support it. And then, at this point, the big question is, remember, we're talking React. React does component-based builds, right? You've got lots of little JavaScript files, each one representing a component. You don't want to be shipping them one by one to the browser because that's a huge overhead. Webpack is a tool that really lets you kind of walks through your code based on configuration, picks all these little files that are needed, packages them, and gives you one bundle that you can then deploy. That can be kind of like loaded into the browser on one load, right? So all these tools, if you try to manage and configure them on your own, it can be kind of a hassle. This particular scaffolder makes it super easy. So let's kind of try to put it all together. Really quickly, how am I doing on time? Because I know I started a little late. Do you know how long this session goes on for? 4? Oh, my Lord. All right. So for what it's worth, there are links to this, but let's kind of walk through what the steps are. So the simple demo, I'm going to take a minute to see if we can actually see that. So here is, do you guys see these two? OK, so this is actually what it looks like, and you can go check it out right now. So I created this earlier today, and I want to walk you through some of the things that you can see on the console. So using Create React App, I created just a very simple scaffold, and we'll walk through the steps in a minute, but I want to just show you what it does. So on this side, you have the Firebase console, and in here is my friendly chat React app. When I go in here, I can go into the database, and I can see that I currently just have a single object in my database, which is zip code. And this zip code, you can see on the other side, there's a hello from zip code, right? If my Wi-Fi and everything is working in real time, right? So you can see that the two are connected. The other one on this side, the React app, is actually running in the browser on the server. So I don't know if I can see this for a second. So you can see friendly chat firebaseapp.com. So the reason I point this out is that this kind of are the three things that I hope I can talk to you about before we have to close. First is scaffold your React app. Second is take that React app and actually host it on Firebase, which is what's happening now. Third is use Firebase to be your backend database. And fourth is then connect your backend database to the front-end app so that your data is kept in sync. Once you have this done, then this is the code lab that you kind of can walk through on your own, which is really provided on the Google side and step by step. You can now walk through these exact steps on that code base that's provided. And you will actually then be running this with React Fire rather than with vanilla.js. So let's kind of look at what it takes to build a simple React app. All right, so this is what we're going to try to get to. What we'll hopefully explore are these steps. First is scaffold a React Fire app. Second is think a little bit about the life cycle, where and when you would put in the code that will actually connect you to Firebase. Third is talk a little bit about auto-rendering. When the data changes, how does that automatically influence your app? Then Firebase, we look at project setup, hosting, how do you deploy it to the web, integrate database, look at security rules, and then you come back and we'll actually look at what the code does to make your React app talk to Firebase. So this is what you do to get started with create React app. npm install -g create React app. And when you do this, you actually get yourself a whole bunch of boilerplate code set up that gives you this basic app. So we can actually look at what some of that looks like. So when you run it through this, it sets up this basic hierarchy for you, and you can see it's automatically given you a base index HTML. It's installed all the dependencies from Node. It's created the package JSON.file, so if you add more dependencies, it's set up for you. And then in the source, you see these files, app.css, app.js, app.test, and an index.js and index.css. Index.js and index.css are the ones that actually will be the entry point for Webpack. Apps.css, app.js is one component. So we can kind of look briefly at what that looks like. So can you guys see the code on this? I can't see the size of the screen. Is that visible? All right. So let's walk through some of this. So I'm going to close out. This is the friendly chat app. So we're only going to look at the friendly React app. So if you look at this, the first thing you'll realize is this is the scaffold React provides you, right? So in here, all you get is an entry point, a configuration system that's configured to use the Firebase database, and we'll look at that in a second. And then in the React DOM render, it says the only thing I want you to render is this one component, right? And because we have Webpack, I can actually tell it, hey, this component that you need, you can find it in a file called app. So Webpack will automatically go looking for a file that declares this component. So let's go check out what that looks like. So this is what a React component looks like, right? So in here, we'll talk about the Firebase part in a minute, but you declare your class, you declare your app, right? And the one thing you're going to do at the end is you're going to export it so that you're basically saying from this file, the component that's available in the namespace is going to be called app. So now when Webpack puts it together, it's going to associate this with app. Now let's look inside this. So in addition to scaffolding, I'd already also set this up to talk to Firebase, but if you kind of just look at it at a very high level, you'll see two things. The first is that there is a constructor, and in this constructor, there is something called state. This state variable is what React uses as the state of your component. Anything which changes this state variable automatically triggers this render to happen again. And we can see that in just a second, because if I inspect this, can you guys see that? You can see that when I change the data, did you see that it automatically called render again? So if you look at this, what happens here is that in our code, we first, by integrating the Firebase SDK in here, and I'll kind of share the script with you in a second, we import all of the code that's in the Firebase library into our app using this one statement, and now all the Firebase API is accessible through this global variable called Firebase. In our constructor, we set up a variable to hold the state. So this is the state of our component. And then these are the lifecycle methods in React. The component didMount is a method that's called back right before that component is actually shown. So in here, anything that you want to do to initialize your component state before it's rendered, you would do in here. So in here, what we're actually doing is we are connecting our Firebase database to this React component within component didMount. So in the React lifecycle, before it's actually rendered, it's going to go in here, it's going to set up our connection to the Firebase database. And inside the Firebase database, it's looking for a single value called zip code, which is the only object we have there right now. And it sets up a callback where every time the value of that variable is changed in Firebase, it triggers a set state which changes the state of your React variable. So of your React component state. So if you take away only one thing, this is the only thing you need to kind of keep in mind on how you hook the two together. Meaning that now, in your component, during this load component, you basically connect it to the backend database, reference the object in Firebase that represents the state that you want to impact your component, and then you set up the callback so that every time that changes, you use the changes to change the state of the React component. And that's it. You don't do anything else. Now, every time Firebase data changes, it triggers this event. And then within React, React says, oh, the state got changed. I'm going to call the render method again and update it. And the render method, since it's bound to the state of whatever you had in the state variable, will now pick up the latest data and show it to you, right? So effectively, by doing just this, you've connected the two together. The other thing that we want to look at is also the updates, the other lifecycle methods. So in React, the sequence in which it happens. So how many of you here are Android developers? OK, so you're very familiar with this notion of lifecycle and callbacks, right? So think very much the same way. In React, you as a coder, your only job when you write a React component is you will go into the render method, and you will tell it what it needs to show on the screen. So that's the part where it tells you, here are the components that I want you to put on the screen, and the job of the render method is to return an element that can be rendered into the DOM. You will then fill in all the different callbacks so that you basically tell it how that influences the state of your app, right? So I see some folks coming in. So let's try to just close this out, and then hopefully if there's time, you can come back and talk to me about questions. So setting up the scaffold is really easy. You get the boilerplate, and then you have automatic methods that let you run a build. So you can take all the files and create a single build file, and you can also run tests on it. We also looked at this already, integrating with Firebase. So you effectively just go to the Firebase project that you created. And in there, when you go look at the Firebase console, you'll see that there's an option there to add Firebase to your web app. When you select that, it'll actually, oh, sorry, we're going to talk hosting for a second before we go into this. So for hosting, it's really simple. You have to install Firebase tools. When you install Firebase tools, you can just create a little seed in your local directory that tells Firebase where you want to install this app. Once you've set it up to be initialized, then you just do a Firebase deploy. It picks all that stuff up and ships it. So this kind of walks through the whole process of setup. And when you're done with this is a command line tool. When you're done with this, your app is actually running on Firebase. At this point, it's not connected to anything else. Next, you want to actually, oh yeah, so when you finish running it on Firebase, you can go into the dashboard and you can see your deployments. I'll just say one nice thing about Firebase, which is pretty cool, is that every time you upgrade and you put out a new deployment, all past deployments show up. So for any reason you do make a mistake with the current deployment, you can roll back. You can manage your deploys. And then adding database. So you saw the code on the React side where a React component is hooked up to talk to Firebase. But how did you set that up? Firebase actually makes it really simple. When you go to the Firebase dashboard and you click the Add Firebase to Web App button, it gives you the script and the information that you need to add in. All you do is you take this information and you stick it right into the Create React App scaffold right here. So the same details that were given there, you literally just copy paste them into index.js so they're available there, and that's all you need to do. So scaffold your React app, go to the Firebase database, click the button, grab that config, stick it into the index.js that you see here. Now you're connected to Firebase. Then go into each component that you're going to be using, and in that, you would literally now, since you have access to the Firebase library, make the calls that you need to make to actually work with the database. We kind of did this code walkthrough, so let's go past that. So I don't have much time, but I do want to recommend, if you think this is interesting, most of the stuff is walked through very nicely in this series called Firecast. This is from a Google developer advocate called David East. I would actually recommend you kind of subscribe to the whole Firebase playlist because they kind of give you really bite-sized videos to try out all the different things. But this specific set of videos will really get you kind of completely set up with React. And no need to take pictures of that. The link is available. You can grab the whole slides later. Finally, if you kind of think this is interesting and want to try building this chat app yourself, my details are at the end. Just hit me up. I have a dump, like a GitHub file of an entire app that's built on that scaffold that ports this code lab to that particular kind of base. So I can ship it to you. But what I would suggest is if you think this is interesting, take those 3 steps. Try to do this yourself. This actually walks you through step by step. The only difference is you've got to figure out how to do it with the React code base. And so, quick recap. Hopefully, you got something out of this, which is, what are your real table stakes? So right now, when you build a web app, you want something that's going to get you offline support, that's going to get you real-time, reactive, responsive design, and that allows you to basically focus more on the front end than the back end. We kind of looked at the 2 technologies in this space, which is Firebase and React. Firebase is really kind of outsourcing your back end, and React is about focusing on a front end that only has opinions on the view. It's the V and the MVC, and doesn't care about what else you do. So you can now think about this combination as manage your application state with React and synchronize your application data across clients with Firebase. And finally, a very simple example of how you can get 2 toolkits from each of these, both command line driven, put them together, and get started with a simple scaffold. All those slides are available there. I'll actually kind of put a link to the final GitHub repo, which has the finished friendly chat app as well. If you have any questions, that's my Twitter handle, that's my G+ handle, that's my LinkedIn. But other than that, I should be around for a little while. Come ask me anything you like. And I like to talk about pretty much every web technology out there. So hopefully this was interesting. And thank you. I don't know if